Okay, so there have been some people who have taken Merton's ideas and elaborated on them. One example of that would be two criminologists named Messner and Rosenfeld, and in 1995 they took the ideas of Merton and took the ideas in strain and anomie theory and wrote a theory that they called institutional anomie theory, which I always tend to abbreviate IAT in lectures. So Messner and Rosenfeld were two criminologists, and in 1995 they wrote a book called Crime and the American Dream. And what they were interested in is they set out wanting to explain why American crime is exceptional, why American crime is so much higher than other parts of the world. And they used the ideas of anomie to basically blame American crime on the American dream. So if you guys had to summarize what the American dream is, think about what you would say to me if I asked you to describe the American dream to me. If we were in class, some of you might raise your hand and say that the American dream is achieving wealth and power and success. Others of you might say the American dream is that no matter where you come from, if you work hard, you can get what you want. You can be successful. So there's a couple different kind of themes running through these ideas of the American dream. The ideas of individualism, that it's up to you to get what you want. The idea of ambition, that getting wealth and getting power and getting more and more success is important. And the idea that one of the big ways to be successful is accumulating money, accumulating wealth. So for them, this is a macro level theory trying to explain at a societal level why American crime is so exceptional. And they used the idea of the American dream to explain this. According to them, all of these ideas that I've talked about in terms of what the American dream is, these themes are very conducive to crime happening because, according to Messner and Rosenfeld, the American dream encourages the idea that the end, getting wealth and success, justifies the means to get it. So for them, one problem with the American dream is that people are encouraged to gather and accumulate wealth and shoot for success and power and get that by any means necessary, including maybe committing crime. And material success for them is really the key. Now, the reason that this is called institutional anomie theory is that they believe that the institution of the economy and achieving economic success has created a state of anomie in America. A state of mind where the goal of wealth has trumped the goals of other important institutions in our society. So to give you an example, what they believed, what Messner and Rosenfeld believed, and what they wrote about in this book is that the economic goals that we've all built up in this country are so powerful, and the message that these are important is so prominent that goals of other institutions in our society have been weakened. And not only that, not only have they been weakened, but economic goals have started to kind of infiltrate other institutions, like the institution of the family and the institution of education and the school. They believed that really, because of the institution of the economy, it was causing this state of normalness. So think about it this way. In terms of this idea of the economic goals infiltrating the goals of the family and the goals of school, what would you guys think is the goal of going to college? Why are you guys all sitting sometimes in a classroom, sometimes in front of your computer listening to this lecture? Why go to college? Now, if we were in the classroom, some of you might raise your hand and say, well, I'm in college because having a college degree gets you a better job. I'm in college because I want to be able to have a successful career later on in life. College is necessary to achieving that goal. Well, Messner and Rosenfeld would use those kind of answers as evidence of the fact that economic goals have infiltrated the institution of school. In other words, they would not assume that a lot of you would raise your hand and say, well, I'm in college because I want to gain more knowledge and understanding. I'm interested in developing my knowledge, my intellect. According to them, not a whole lot of people in America really say that. For them, most people think about school as being important because it gets you a better job and a better life later. So that, for them, is evidence of the economy infiltrating the institution of school. In terms of the family, if, let's say 15 years down the line, you guys are married with young families, and either you or your spouse comes home from work one night and says, great news. I just got a great promotion. I get excellent benefits. I get, $50,000 raise. Oh, there's just one problem. We have to move across the country and start over again for me to have this job. Well, according to Messer and Rosenfeld, most people would probably do it. If someone gets a promotion that requires them to uproot their family, Messer and Rosenfeld would argue that most people would absolutely do it if it meant getting the family more economic stability, even though things like breaking up family networks in the place that you're living, breaking up peer networks, neighborhood relationships, all of those things get destroyed for the sake of moving somewhere for a better economic life. So according to them, this is all example of how the institution of the economy has created this state of anomie in America. And for Messner and Rosenfeld, crime is really a result of this overemphasis on money. Because the end justifies the means in this country, a lot of people are going to feel as though crimes are worth it if they get you the things that you want and you strive for. That sometimes you have to commit crimes and cut corners and do some things that are illegal if it means getting what you want and getting what you strive for in the end. Their main point here is as long as there is a disproportionate emphasis on monetary rewards, money and wealth, crime is always going to increase and be high in a place like America. So this is really an American-specific theory of crime, right? They're trying to explain why this American dream that we've built up is really causing our high state of crime. Well, not everyone really likes the ideas of not only of Mesner and Rosenfeld in their institutional anomie theory, but also the ideas that Merton presented in his classic theory that dealt with strain and anomie. And some of these critiques are, there are several critiques. One of the big ones is you may have noticed that for the most part throughout the beginning of this lecture, when I'm talking about crime and when people like Durkheim and Merton, to a large extent, and Messner and Rosenfeld are talking about crime, they're talking about people of a lower socioeconomic status committing crime. And that's one of the critiques of this theory, is that it's really only good at explaining why poor people commit crime, because they arguably are committing crime to rise out of their poor conditions. It's not really good at explaining why people of middle, upper classes might commit crime, even though we know that those people do commit crimes. Crime isn't just a lower class phenomenon. So that's one critique of the theory. It's only good at explaining the crime of a subset of the population. Another critique of the theory is this assumption the theory is based on, that we all share this goal of monetary success and power above all else that everyone agrees on. And critics of these theories really question that. Do we really all have that goal is the most important thing? America is such a heterogeneous society. There are so many different cultures and social groups and mixes in this country. Is it fair to say that everyone places the same emphasis on seeking wealth and power and success? So that's another critique. A third critique of the ideas of Merton and the ideas of Messner and Rosenfeld in their institutional anomie theory is, the way that these theories are structured, they tend to describe crime as being something that people commit to get something. Crime is something you commit to get towards having more wealth or more money or more power. And for some crimes that might be true. You might be able to explain them that way. But what about all the crimes that people commit that we would call non-utilitarian crimes? When I say non-utilitarian, what I mean is there are a lot of criminal behaviors out there that are just useless, destructive, violent, impulsive behaviors that don't really have any obvious utility to them. If you're someone who likes to go behind people's houses and, knock over and damage their trash cans or graffiti people's garages, all of those are criminal acts, but they don't really have a usefulness in terms of rising you above your current social condition. Even things like violent impulsive behavior, it's hard to explain why somebody might hurt someone, might be violent towards someone, as something that will help them get above and reach their goals. So one of the critiques of these theories is it's not really very good at explaining non-utilitarian crimes. And a final critique of the ideas in the several different strain theories is these theories tend to be based on the assumption that, you know, one of the reasons why America has so much crime is because of the emphasis we've placed on these economic goals. That we have these goals in our society to get rich or die trying, achieve money and wealth and success by any means necessary. And one of the criticisms of that idea is we're not the only society that has people who want to be wealthy and successful and powerful. That's not a uniquely American trait, wanting to be successful. And the question is, other societies have similar goals to us but have much less crime. And, you know, if you think of some examples of places that have, you know, fairly similar types of goals, countries like Japan or European countries, Switzerland maybe would be an example. Places where people have similar goals of achieving success, but the crime rates in those countries are much, much lower. So that's a critique of this theory because it doesn't seem like what's driving crime in America is driving crime in other places. All right, so let's take a little bit of a departure here from these macro level theories and talk about an individual level take on the idea of strain. And this is a theory that was introduced by a criminologist named Robert Agnew in the 1990s, and it's called general strain theory. So as I said, this is an individual level theory. He wasn't interested in explaining societal differences in criminal behavior. What Robert Agnew was interested in is, can you use these ideas, the ideas of strain and the ideas of anomie, to explain why certain people commit crime and certain people don't? Can you break down this idea and talk about it on an individual level? And so that's what Robert Agnew tried to do in his theory, which he called general strain theory. So Robert Agnew starts out by really questioning the idea that the only types of things that can cause people to experience strain are being blocked from kind of lofty goals. According to him, there are a lot of different strains that a person can experience that might lead them to commit crime. Goals being blocked is definitely one of them for him. You know, wanting something that you don't feel like you have the ability to get. That's taken straight out of Merton and Messer and Rosenfeld. And he thinks that's important, but he also adds in these other two examples of strains that can be important in causing someone to commit crime. The first one is adding negative stimuli into a person's life. And, you know, because this is an individual level theory for him, what you perceive as being something negative getting introduced into your life, that's going to differ on an individual level. But if it's extreme enough and severe enough, it could cause you to commit crime. So let's think about what this means, adding negative stimuli. Basically what that means is whenever some kind of a bad condition or experience is something that you have to go through in your life. So if you're a child, an example of the addition of a negative stimuli could be if someone starts to bully you at school, someone starts to bother you, beat you up. That's the addition of a negative stimuli. It's the addition into your life of something negative that you're going to have to deal with. The opposite of that, which he said was another way that people could experience strain, would be when the removal of positive stimuli happens in a person's life. So if you think about this, this basically means, you know, when something good in your life gets taken away from you. And some examples of that could be, you know, if you're a child, if one of your parents moves out, one of your parents dies, is taken away from you in some way, you don't have that influence in your life. That could be something positive being taken away from you that you have to deal with. If you move away from friends, you know, you lose friends for some reason. That could be the removal of something good that was in your life. So according to him, anything that you could put into these three categories could be, if it was severe enough and serious enough, it could be something that could cause you to commit crime. So for him, strain, his idea of what strain is a little bit different from the other theorists because he's talking about strain being experienced at the individual level. For Agnew, experiencing strain is just experiencing anger, experiencing frustration. If something causes you strain, it makes you angry, it makes you mad, it frustrates you. You have to deal with that in a bunch of different ways. And the ways that you deal with experiencing strain for him are going to put you at different kinds of risk to commit crime. So, what we'll look at on the next slide is Agnew's theory kind of modeled out. And what I will show you at the end of the theory is are the different coping strategies that he describes for how some people might deal with strains in their life and what kinds of coping strategies are most likely to lead to someone committing crime. And you can think about this again, this is a general theory. He thinks that most people go through experiencing strains all the time. So as you go through the theory, maybe think about applying it to some example in your own life and how you dealt with it. All right, so let's look at his model. Again, for Agnew, at the individual level, strains are something that everyone experiences. At different points in our lives, almost all of us have experienced cases where things that we want are blocked from us. We want things that we can't get. Bad things have been introduced into our lives. Good things have been removed from our lives. For him, when those kind of strains happen, that's going to cause us to feel anger and frustration. And that's significant because when you're angry and frustrated, you have to deal with it in some way. And the way that you cope, the coping strategies that a person develops over time to deal with anger and frustration are going to put them at different levels of risk to commit crime. So let's take a look at the three different coping strategies that Agnew came up with for how people tend to deal with crime. For how people tend to deal with anger and frustration. So these are coping strategies that everyone experiences. The first one for him was what he called emotional coping. So people who he would describe as being people that tend to cope emotionally would be people that tend to deal with anger and frustration by crying, by shouting, venting emotionally. Those are kind of the ways for him that emotional coping can happen. And for him, he didn't really see emotional coping as being something that leads to a whole lot of crime, unless you deal with emotional coping by, resorting to drugs and alcohol. That could be an example of something that could get you into trouble. But for him, emotional coping isn't going to be the most criminal type of coping strategy. The second type of coping strategy that he came up with was cognitive coping. And for him, this is the healthiest way to deal with anger and frustration that gets brought on by strains in a person's life. So for him, if something happens, some kind of a strain happens and you get angry, and you deal with that by thinking through it, coming up with a solution in your mind, and feeling better as a result of it, that's cognitive coping. You're coping with it by cognitively going through it in your mind and moving forward without necessarily doing anything physically. So for him, there are examples of that not necessarily going so well, but that's going to be the one that's least likely to cause you to commit crime. For Agnew, the type of coping strategy that is most likely to result in criminal behavior is when you cope with anger and frustration in a behavioral way. And what he means by that is if something makes you angry, any of those different types of strains make you angry, you cope with it by hitting something, hitting a person, doing something behaviorally. And the problem with that is if you tend to cope with your anger and frustration in that way, you're probably going to be at a heightened risk of not only harming other people's property, but harming other people's persons. And that's going to be the kind of coping strategy that causes you to commit crime the most. So what I want you to take a look at is what I like to call coping mechanisms in action. And after you finish this slide, you're going to finish this section of the lecture and click on a clip from the movie High Fidelity. Now, for those of you who have not seen this movie, the main character in this movie is played by John Cusack. And John Cusack has been dumped by his girlfriend, and she has moved on to this new person named Ian, who's played by Tim Robbins. Well, John Cusack doesn't deal with this very well and kind of stalks this girl and calls her a whole lot and bothers her after they've broken up. So the scene that you're going to see is Ian, the new boyfriend, confronting John Cusack about his stalking behavior. And in the movie, they go through kind of they show you what different kinds of things John Cusack thinks about doing in this situation. And what you'll see, what I want you to think about while you watch it is pick out which of the coping strategies he thinks about doing are emotional, behavioral, and cognitive, and which one he ends up actually doing. And please excuse his language.